The EU was set up in order to take advantage of the United States.
Including Ireland? Is Ireland taking advantage of the US?
Of course they are. But the United States shouldn't have let it happen.
Whether it's taking advantage of the United States or not, the facts show that Ireland is winning more than it's losing in the competition for American business.
So the Irish story with corporate tax and multinationals is probably a 5-decade-long story, at least at this stage. Particularly since we joined the European Union, it's been a real differentiator having a low corporate tax rate.
Ireland's Investment Promotion Agency, the IDA, reports that more than 90 pharmaceutical companies operate in the country, and many of them are U.S.-based. All of this is no coincidence. For the companies, Ireland offers a range of advantages, and one of them is its sweet tax arrangement, part of a long-term Irish plan to attract foreign direct investment. Danny McCoy is the CEO of the Irish Business and Employers Confederations.
We're looking at an FDI model that's built on certainty and longevity. I think that's been really significant in the last decade in terms of the flight of capital towards Ireland as a result of the OECD corporate tax work. Big brands like Intel, Apple, and Pfizer have a history here. In the case of Intel, they're nearly newbies at over 40 years. Apple's been here since 1980, and Pfizer are probably the best part of a century in one form or another. So longevity and the very big brands have been co-located here in Ireland long before the corporate tax world that we've entered into in the last decade.
I think there's many different reasons why, both why they set up shop initially and then also why they've continued investment in Ireland and continue to expand in Ireland.
Jennifer Duggan is Bloomberg's Ireland bureau chief.
I think certainly there were a number of tax incentives initially there to really entice international companies to come to Ireland. And I think that probably started a lot of that initial investment. But I think there's a number of things that, has helped Ireland continue to attract investment.
The Irish strategy to use taxes to compete for foreign investment went into overdrive during the great financial crisis.
When the global financial crisis happened, we were part of an IMF ECB bailout. When I first joined the government in 2011, we had 14% unemployment, we had a massive budget deficit, and we were able to turn that around. And we mainly turned it around based on the traded sector of our economy. And that was producing goods and services that we could sell to the world. And US firms were a big part of that.
Leo Varadkar was Ireland's Prime Minister from 2017 to 2020, and then again from 2022 to 2024.
How material to the fiscal situation in Ireland has been, if I can say it, the extra money from corporate income tax?
It's been a huge help. It's a big part of our tax base, larger than would be the case for most developed countries.
Corporate taxes make up close to 20% of total government revenues, most of which comes from U.S. multinationals. But it wasn't just the Irish government's business-friendly policies that got us to where we are. The U.S. did its fair share to drive away business.
I think really the role of Ireland as a major center of tax policy or of tax sort of goes back to the 1980s in some form, but it really gets going in the late 1990s and early 2000s.
Alex Arnon is Director of Policy Analysis at the Penn Wharton budget model.
One of the key changes there is on the U.S. side, is the introduction of what's called check-the-box regulations. Essentially, it made it easier for U.S. multinationals to manage their overseas operations. And so this change in U.S. regulations combines with some very specific attractive features of the Irish tax environment. Starting in the 1990s, they dramatically reduced their corporate tax rate down to about 12.5% by 2003. Ireland also has a lot of bilateral tax treaties with other countries, which makes it easy to manage the relationship between your subsidiaries across those countries. So the combination of those U.S. policy changes, the Irish tax environment, and then some features of Ireland as an economy that made it attractive.
This isn't the first time that President Trump has focused on Ireland's success in luring U.S. businesses. His Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 tried to address at least some of the problems.
When we look at the Irish royalty payments to other countries, before 2019-2020, you see the vast majority of these payments are going to tax havens. That's Bermuda, the Cayman Islands, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Singapore. And then starting in 2020, we see a very sharp crossing of the pattern, of the trends here, where royalty payments to these tax havens fall off a cliff, royalty payments directly to the US shoot up. And often this is interrelated with some of the changes in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, in particular the deduction for foreign-derived intangible income.
I think we are vulnerable. Ireland is a small country in a very big world, and we've done very well because of globalization. It's one of the things that's helped us to become a wealthy country and has allowed us to increase our standard of living considerably. So a less globalized world is going to be less favorable to Ireland economically. But I'm not as pessimistic, I think, as maybe others are. The United States is certainly now going in a direction which is protectionist, and that's definitely going to be a negative for us. But at the same time, you know, the European Union, 27 countries, 400 million people, is doubling down on free trade.
Now, President Trump is once again focused on Ireland's big attraction for U.S. pharmaceutical companies. But this time, the tool he wants to use isn't taxes, but one of his favorites, tariffs.
If your single goal was to get U.S. pharmaceutical companies to make more onshore in the United States, would you use tax policy or tariff policy?
And obviously, tariffs are a form of tax, but really here, the much more important component is the corporate income tax policy. If what we were talking about was a deeply considered, well-planned out, long-term strategy for predictable tariffs on pharmaceuticals, that might be a different story. That might start encouraging some major multinationals to rethink how they have arranged their activities around the globe. If it's what we have been seeing in practice from the Trump administration over the last few months, very hard to imagine really any big corporation making major long-term decisions on that basis. It's just too unpredictable, and that is really the biggest factor there.
I don't see it being a doomsday situation where suddenly all of US pharma and tech companies move out of Ireland. I don't think that's something that's going to happen overnight, but it certainly has the potential to damage Ireland's economy and also its attractiveness to future investment as well. Ireland has the second largest exports to the US from the EU, only behind Germany, and most of that is from the pharmaceutical industry. If US companies start to invest less in Ireland or start to move even small parts of their production back to the US, yeah, that would certainly have an impact. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but you know, as we see going forward over the next 5 years, the rest of the lifetime of this administration, it is something that we could see gradual changes.
It is hard to imagine what they will actually come out with would be enough to really prompt major shifts in the long-term planning and activities. There's a couple other wrinkles in there. You know, Ireland has an exit tax for intellectual property, so if a major U.S. manufacturer of pharmaceuticals did want to, move some of their valuable patents out of Ireland back to the U.S., they would have to not just get more benefit than they're losing from what they currently have in terms of their strategy. They would have to be enough to offset this exit tax that Ireland will levy, and which they have specifically to prevent this sort of thing.
Ireland has seen change coming and has provided for it by investing the revenues it has enjoyed until now.
Ireland has one of only 2 trade surpluses within the EU. Being open to foreign direct investment and multinationals, I think, has brought a lot of multiculturalism to Ireland as well, and really helped, propel Ireland in its development in terms of just to be more diverse, more progressive. So there's a number of different ways that it's impacted from an education perspective as well.
It's been a huge help. It's a big part of our tax base, larger than would be the case for most developed countries. And we've invested in infrastructure in particular, and that will continue. But we've also thought ahead. While it might have been tempting to ramp up public spending by much more than we did, we haven't done that. So the government for 2025 anticipates running a budget surplus of just under 3% of GDP. There might be a fall off in the amount of corporate tax revenues that come into the Irish Exchequer, and that's why we've pay down our debt, why we are running substantial government surpluses, notwithstanding a lot of political pressure back home to spend more on just about everything. And we've also established some future sovereign wealth funds, putting aside money for future pension and care liabilities, and also things like the cost of climate action into the future as well.
And in the competition for the U.S. pharmaceutical business, Ireland has a lot going for it beyond favorable taxes.
The investment pipeline still remains very strong. A lot of US companies investing in Ireland, a lot expanding their operations. I think because of the geopolitical changes that are happening and the changes in the rules of tax and trade, We mightn't see the same level of new investment in the years ahead as we saw in the past. But I'd certainly be optimistic that those, big pharma, big medical devices, chip operations will continue to operate. There's going to be a market for these products and a growing and expanding market for these products, not just in the US, but in other parts of the world as well. And bear in mind, we're part of the European single market, a market of over 400 million people, and the European Union has a network of free trade agreements with lots of different parts of the world. I'm confident those operations will continue.
International businesses trust Ireland, and they've got a history and a record to prove it.
We've seen Ireland's economy bounce back and really recover, and international presence of major companies has certainly helped that.
In the end, what the United States does to compete for pharmaceutical manufacturing will depend in large part on one man, President Trump.
I think what we don't hear enough about is the bilateral relationship. It used to be very one-way, but now Ireland invests a lot in the US. We're the 6th biggest investor in the US, which isn't bad for a small country of just over 5 million people. And depending on how you count it, there's somewhere between 100 and 200,000 Americans across 50 states working in Irish-owned companies. But certainly there is a focus on tax. And one thing I would have said to President Trump, and I met him many times, is that if there is an issue around tax laws, it's probably more of an issue with American laws than our laws. The anomalies that maybe exist in the law are probably more on the American side. And in fairness, he's acknowledged that. He said that we've been very smart in our tax policies. We've always expected at some point that the US would change theirs.